Eriksholm The Stolen Dream isn't technically a historical game, but if you play it for any length of time, you'll understand why I'm counting it as one. It's an extremely unsubtle stand in for turn of the century Scandinavia, with all of the anxieties and political issues going on, with particularly Sweden at that moment in time. You play as Hannah, a young girl trying to rescue her brother Herman, who's being looked chased by the cops for not entirely obvious reasons. This whole thing rapidly spirals into a pretty ambitious story of political intrigue with all sorts of twists and turns and quite the escalation of stakes by the end. One of my favorite parts of the game was definitely the collectibles. They were all advertisements, mostly in the style of Victorian advertising. So, in the mid 19th century, the ability to print advertisements in color with a very particular kind of quasi hand drawn art style, but reproduced en masse, became immensely affordable. And so between like 1870 and 1920, there's just a ridiculous explosion in advertising culture. And the game really leans into that in a way that's very, very fun. And I had just an absolutely great time trying to find all of those. I did fail. I missed like four or five over the course of the game, which I am still ashamed about. But the ones we did see were just really, really well done. In some cases, down to the specific language they're using, which is not the way we describe some of those chemical compounds these days. They clearly did their research, and I respect it immensely. The other thing the game does fantastically is architecture. All of the areas look so well lived in and so authentic to archival photos of Stockholm from the first decade of the 1900s. Like, quite clearly, they're being very careful about that material, being very careful about what they're doing, and it works. It works great. There's really no other way to say it. Even though it's not technically actually set in Stockholm, it might as well, or Malmo, it might as well be, and it just works. Narratively, the thing I appreciate about that game so much is how well it captures the anxieties of the time period. So, right, whether we're looking at definitely not fantasy Russia being a bit belligerent in the Baltic, whether we're looking at epidemic, whether that's tuberculosis or the Spanish flu, whether we're looking at industrial technologies, military and regular, looking at corporations and industry beginning to prevent local fishermen from making the same living that they've been able to for a long time. All of that is extremely authentic to this moment. See, Scandinavia is a bit late to the industrialization ballgame, so instead of, the 1850s, 1860s seeing mass industrialization, we're looking at the 1870s, 1880s when American grain makes the entire market for Scandinavian agriculture collapse, and they hard pivot into industrial fishing as one of several solutions to this problem. This meant a lot of local small fishermen who would just, go out in small boats, catch a few fish, sell them at market. That entire way of life rapidly falls apart as they industrialize because overfishing is such a problem. The fish are just not there anymore. In turn, right, iron mining becomes a huge, huge, huge deal because Sweden has some of the largest iron deposits in the world, and the mines actually are still causing towns in northern Sweden to collapse into the ground. It's a genuine problem whose the consequences we're still feeling to this day. So the game is capturing all of that anxiety in the narrative really, really well. And so even though it's not technically historical, there's such a thin veneer of fantasy over the top of it that I think it becomes a really good way to exercise historical empathy. See, the game's cinematic style and world building quality makes it super duper immersive, and that's awesome because it means as we're going, right, we're able to really think about and experience and empathize with all of these struggles and then translate them back into the real world with very little friction. So it makes it a really worthy historical game and one that I highly, highly recommend everyone check out. You can check out all of my reactions in the playlist below, but do let me know your thoughts on this sort of unscripted historical review. If you like them, I'll try and do it a lot closer to when we actually play the game, so I'm not relying on 6-month-old memories. So yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and hopefully we will catch you in some of our weekend live streams.